All right, welcome to the House Judiciary Committee this Thursday morning, April 30th. And we are going to be looking again at S-193. We have, I think, three witnesses. I'm going to see what order I have them in. At my agenda, I apologize. So we can start with Dr. Ravin, just to flag this, what we've been working on, Seema, is primarily sections 1 through 3, and it's the process of for sending individuals to the forensic facility. But if you have comments beyond that, that's fine. But I just want you to understand that that's kind of been our focus. So over to you. Identify yourself for the record and proceed. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for inviting me to have this discussion with you about S-193. I'm Dr. Simcha Ravin. I'm a forensic and adult psychiatrist, and that means that I specialize in the intersection of mental health and law, and specifically for the care of individuals who experience serious mental illness and have justice involvement. I serve as Chief Medical Officer at Howard Center and Assistant Clinical Professor in Psychiatry at Yale University School of Medicine. I'm also one of the Vermont delegates to the American Medical Association House of Delegates. I'm looking forward to sharing any experience or knowledge that I have from my work and training in forensic psychiatry and my experience as a designated agency medical director. I did have a chance to review the proposed legislation. I had 2 comments and thoughts. They're not on the section that you described, but
Please go ahead.
If you would, I'll share those before we start a discussion if the committee would allow.
Yep. No, please go ahead.
Sure. So there were two pieces that came out to me. Relating to individuals found not guilty by reason of insanity, it's noted that the court would order a forensic risk assessment, and this risk assessment would have multiple components, including, but not limited to, the individual's history, present dangerousness, and other elements. My recommendation would be to add, as an element of the forensic risk assessment, recommendations for treatment and supervision, a thorough risk assessment, and a trained mental health professional who is trained in conducting risk assessments will often include and give very helpful recommendations for treatment and supervision that would support that individual's success and mitigate future risk of violence.
So is that language that you could email to Nate so that we have that rather than trying to get it? And for folks, that's it's actually in the section that we're primarily responsible for, section 3. I'm looking at page 10 to 11 is presumably where that would go, because that's where the forensic risk assessment for not guilty by reason of insanity is. Okay.
I will gladly email that.
Great, thanks.
The other comment I wanted to make, it has been my experience for individuals who are found not guilty by reason of insanity, who are transitioned from a hospital or residential setting to a community setting, that appropriately supportive and appropriately supervised housing is a vital element for their success. And that housing be specifically, that it be resourced and specifically for that population. It has been my experience that without that resource for supervision and housing, and often robustly supervised housing, individuals are unlikely to be successful in the community and unlikely to have the support and sort of protection against future community violence.
Okay, I'm trying to see where such
So,
language could go. Can you point us to?
sure. It is in the passage where it's delineated that individuals who are found not guilty by reason of insanity in the community would be mandated or required to engage in the recommended mental health, medical, psychiatric, and psychological treatment.
Right.
Hold on, I will grab my.
I think it's on page 14 of this. And that's where there's also the monitoring from of the individual. So this is ordering the release of a person, and then you're suggesting that not just having the prescribed regimen of medical, psychiatric, or psychological care, et cetera, that there be some language about supportive housing. Is that?
Yes, yes, housing and supervised housing, yes.
So wouldn't that be the same for the non-competent, the folks that are not restorable? Or
Yes.
because in that area or in that where we have language regarding the least restrictive environment. Well, actually, no, that's only if they continue to be held because of the danger. Okay.
Certainly for individuals who are not competent and not restorable as well, because there's a great deal of overlap, as you know, in those populations for clinical and oversight needs.
And if you have language on that you could just that would help us out in considering that as well.
Gladly.
Yeah, go ahead, Angela.
Dr. Robin, what would that look like? What does that look like when done well? Like who's supervising, and is it, because I know that we have, I'll just ask that. What does that look like?
So when that is done well, I think that my comments connect to each other. Typically, a forensic risk assessment includes a personalized recommendation of what kind of treatment and housing and supervision that individual is likely to be most successful with. And then those recommendations should be implemented in the housing. It doesn't look wildly different than some of the community housing programs that we have now. But if I were to generalize, thinking of the individuals whose care I've been involved in, the two elements that I think have often been important and hard to attain are 24/7 staff, as well as a gradual transition from a structured environment like a long-term residential or hospital program to a community program with personalized adjustments to make sure that individual is successful and appropriately engaged in treatment so that they will be successful and that their immediate environment, their housing, as well as the larger community safety is supported.
So who's creating all of that and doing the work?
So that's a good question. I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, just who's responsible for the supervision in an ideal scenario?
I think that there are a number of good models. I do think that I think that you'll see the best outcomes when there's a continuity of care from the structured or inpatient setting into the community so that individuals that the clinical teams know the individuals well and support them through a number of different settings, from the most structured inpatient setting to community settings, and have responsibility through the continuum of care.
Okay, so it's the clinical team, whomever that ends up being, which I guess I'm still a bit unsure of.
So some states, the model is that there is a clinical team in the forensic hospital that then follows individuals into the community and follows their care and makes recommendations through regular review. And I think that's a model that has makes some sense because that team grows to know that individual and understands what their needs are, and when they have greater needs or they are experiencing success and growth and can have more flexibility, for example.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So that would be in lieu of, I mean, I've heard the concept of, essentially probation officers doing the monitoring, but this is a whole different kind of scenario or idea for that kind of supervision. It's more on the clinical side than like a probation officer. It's my understanding.
Yes.
Is that something that the designated agencies would do? I think that that's not what the plan is for this, that it wouldn't be handed off to designated agencies like Howard Center, I wouldn't think.
So I think it probably makes sense to have the monitoring and treatment support be continuous. And there are different models that work well, but I don't see this necessarily as the work of the designated agencies.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I have to share that I did not come prepared with specific models, but I'm familiar with the work of different states and seen successful models in other states. And the common element is continuity of the same clinical team that knows the individual rather than distinct entities where an individual is handed off from one team to another with opportunity for gaps in communication or resources.
Right. So one second, Barbara. So in the bill at I'm looking specifically at page 16 through 18, not necessarily our part of the bill, but we've had input on this as well. Is this lays out everything that the forensic facility is supposed to be, or that's what it started as, and this actually came from Health and Welfare in the Senate, and perhaps this is where we add an additional provision regarding supervision, and that it should follow a model that provides for the continuity that we're talking about. And once again, I'll ask you for the third item of language and just kind of because I want to make sure I get that right as far as of what we should be looking for that ongoing supervision from your perspective.
I'm making myself a note. I would be happy.
Yeah, I really appreciate the assistance.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, that was actually one of my big questions for that. So, Barbara, go ahead.
Thank you so much for being here. So I'm wondering, first on this topic, it does look like the sort of the evaluation and the research that I've been able to find shows that the states that are doing, and I realize they can be secure facilities, but the states that are doing more community-based programs, which I know can be hard in a rural state, but have had better sort of forensic outcomes in terms of restoration and people not being a danger, not hurting the community, being safer, I should say. So I'm wondering, when you're talking about these other models, is there a state or two that you think we should be sort of looking at?
I work also in Connecticut and with trainees and faculty at Yale. I think that they've spent the last 35 or 40 years developing the trajectory of forensic mental health care and have robust programs now even more developed for community-based competency restoration. I often look to Connecticut and specifically to the Yale Forensic Psychiatry Group for Innovation.
Susan Ehrenhoff had mentioned actually that organization. Does that organization actually contract with states to help them set up programs? Because I'm wondering, we've worked with council state governments on criminal justice stuff, and it would be great to have sort of the academic research expertise from the experts helping us.
I know that individuals within the Division of Law and Psychiatry do and have expertise over many years and many decades in that area, and have provided informal consultation to groups in Vermont and more formal consultation to other groups.
Great. Another question I have for you is, right now, the bill talks about the forensic facility giving an update every 6 months, and there being that being shared with the court. And my clinical background is way more limited than yours, but that seemed too long to me. And when I was looking at other states, it looked like those treatment updates would include, what services have been offered, what progress has been made, is the person still a danger, what's needed, and that those were occurring somewhere 30 days, 40 days, 90 days. And so I'm just wondering what your thought is about us having 6 months in there.
Could I ask you to refresh my memory about for which group that 6 month and update is for, and in what setting?
It is for
the competency restoration.
Right, yes.
There's a different time frame set forth for not guilty by reason of insanity.
So right, and both of them actually, I'd love your opinion on, but for competency restoration, an every 6 month update.
I feel like to give you a thorough answer, I would need to survey my colleagues who oversee competency restoration programs and the practices more thoroughly. Responding more intuitively, yes, shorter periods of time would make sense given how people generally respond to clinical treatment and what I've seen in terms of competency restoration. Shorter periods of time do intuitively make more sense.
And for people who have been found not competent, well, no, have they been found
Oh,
not competent? So then it's 6 months, then 3 years, then every 5th
Oh,
year.
no, that's not.
No, that's-
guilty by reason of insanity.
That's right, sorry. So that's if they're found innocent by, reason of insanity. So that one is 6 months, 3 years, every 5 years. And at the moment, Vermont is choosing to not put a time limit on restoration. The wording right now is in the probability in the foreseeable future, which seemed a little too vague to me. And I saw that some states have that paired with up to a year or something, so that it's not, if you can see the future 20 years out, that's a long horizon. So I don't know, again, if you had thoughts about that language or a time frame.
I did notice the very long time frame, and one of the thoughts I had while I was reading it was that the proposed Vermont competency restoration program and the treatment program for individuals found not guilty by reason of insanity are for a very narrow population initially accused of very serious crimes, which is a different population than many states who whose programs are for a much broader population. So that difference, I think it makes sense to the current language makes sense for me, given that it is such a narrow population who are accused of such serious crimes.
Thank you. And one last question is Susan Ehrenhoff had suggested that sort of a rate be established for community providers. And that could be community providers in the different agencies, it could be jail providers, community providers of like that sort of a wraparound forensic intensive rate. And I wondered, and then, you know, organizations could decide if they were up to being a provider for that type of service. Back to sort of the first question again of sort of continuity. And I'm wondering if that approach makes sense to you.
I think I would need to know a little bit more in order to comment meaningfully on that.
Okay. And I guess the idea is like, there's no billable code and rate that designated agencies really have now to provide that service. So it would be a loss, which again, I am sensitive about unfunded mandates or unfunded opportunities that we offer our nonprofit partners when they can't sustain that.
I see. So you're talking about a separate funding mechanism separate from those that exist currently to serve this specific population in the intensity that is appropriate for their care.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, thank you, that would allow for the kind of, it sounds like that mechanism would allow for the kind of treatment and intensity that these kinds of programs would require.
And I don't know enough to know, like, are the community-based programs, in addition to some of the research I saw about being more effective, are they the same price as a one forensic facility? And again, I realize you don't have the specifics, but so I guess, you know, I don't know if in general there's any information like, yes, it's, you know, cheaper to deliver them in the community than it is in an institution.
I can tell you that there is literature on the variable costs of competency restoration programs across settings, from inpatient to community-based. Typically, I don't have that data in front of me. Intuitively, it is less costly to deliver in the community, but the populations who are served in those programs are also different. And those who are determined to be appropriate for community-based competency restoration programs are a different population and have different clinical needs and characteristics than those who are generally served in inpatient settings.
And the states that are doing this, my understanding is a lot of them are secure facilities. They're not, they're able to keep the community safe, which obviously is a huge concern that we have. And I just want to confirm that that is something that realistically can be achieved, or that staff aren't getting beat up all the time is something else we heard.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand your question, but they're doing it successfully. I just want to make sure I understand. Your question is, are states who have successful competency restoration programs, both in inpatient and community settings, are they doing it successfully and staff and community are safe in the process?
Yes, thank you. That's exactly.
I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly. Yes, there are sound programs that are successful. And successful for the surrounding community as well as the individual.
Great, thank you.
I think that the issue that I want to emphasize is that it is generally everyone's goal that these individuals who are restored to competence also are transitioned into community settings from structured settings, and that we robustly resource and and consider those needs both upon the transition and the ongoing community needs, in addition to the competency restoration or assessment for those found in GRI in correctional or locked hospital settings.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Abbott? Yeah, go ahead, Angela.
Mm.
Is it
Well,
one for free?
It's sort of a very general question that I'm hoping to tap into your expertise, because we actually haven't spoken to very many experts in this field. True, when I think about the folks who testified on this bill, I think you're one of the very few who has worked directly with this population. You're certainly, as far as I can recall, the first forensic professional that we've spoken to.
Dr. Bowen has that background.
Yes, true.
Yeah.
So at least two. And so I just wanted to ask if you've read, as you review the bill, the proposal, what are your concerns, if you have any, and what might we, I know you've raised a couple of them, but I just have a concern that we are attempting to do this in a way that is not the best way for the population involved, and not the best way for the safety of Vermonters, and leading to I don't feel like we're setting ourselves up for success very well. And I think it seems like this is done well in other states. There are, as you've said, there are other models that work well. And I'm worried that we're trying to invent something that kind of sort of works given our resources and constraints, and that it will end up not really working. And so I wonder if you can just speak to that based on your experience. And have you seen it done well, and are we anywhere close to that with this proposal?
Well, first I want to express my real gratitude to the committee for this extraordinarily thoughtful bill. I think I can tell the work that went into it. I'm very grateful for this work. I have seen the difficulties that we experience as a state, both for the individuals who were found not competent to stand trial and not guilty by reason of insanity, and the impact that has on our community, the negative safety consequences. So I'm really, really grateful for this work. I think I've voiced most of the concerns that I have, that a lot of this work, even if it starts in a structured setting, will take place in the community. And what we struggle with right now is managing this in the community, these individuals without the structure and oversight, with a predictable, from my perspective, predictable and profound safety concerns in the community. And that is one of my concerns, that we look at the continuum of care from structured settings to the community and consider the whole trajectory. My other thought upon reading this is that while there is a wealth of literature about competency restoration in corrections, I think it is preferable to have these this is part of the continuum of forensic mental health treatment, and for these programs to be in treatment settings rather than correctional settings. They can be successful in correctional settings, but this is from my perspective, part of treatment.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Evans? All right, thank you very much for your testimony. I really appreciate you being available. We'll go to Jennifer Pullman next.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, Jennifer.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, committee. I know that Attorney Barber was there yesterday, and she's a little higher up on the food chain than me on this bill, so I'm happy to defer to her as well, however you want to proceed.
Well, I figured that also your section is probably a little bit narrower and it probably won't take quite as much time to look at the latest in the victim language. So why don't we proceed with you and then we'll go to Karen.
So I'll skip all the, for the record, Jennifer Pullman, Director of the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services, and I'll skip all the niceties that I had and get right to it. I do want to just make a couple general comments. Again, we are in support of this concept. We need to have a continuum of care. We need to have a forensic system of care, and we need to consider competency restoration. And as far as the community resources, there's no disagreement on that piece. The Act 27 work group, of which I was vice chair, I testified to a couple of weeks ago. Every single member said, yes, we need to bulk up the community resources because there has to be a strong continuum and we have to have step down options. We have to have choices. And I think Emily Perry's testimony kind of highlighted that conundrum when the conversation ran to, well, should we place, should they place my dad in a nursing home or, simply, one-on-one staffing? And she was horrified that those were some of the options that were out there. So certainly for this particular very narrow population, there needs to be another option. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be building up the resources that are in the communities as well. As a part of that Act 27 group, though, I do want to underscore that with this small population that we're talking about, the number, Dale collected some really important information around the number of elopements and absconsions of individuals have been accused of very, very violent acts, and that also staff were put in significant danger and experienced violent crime as well. So I think that there's information that was revealed through that conversation that is not here yet. You've taken on quite a task and trying to squeeze it into 1 year, but it's really important to think about the whole continuum, options that can meet the individual where they're at and can recognize the acts that were involved. I do understand the controversy and concerns about that have been expressed by many members about placing this within DOC. And I understand because I've been following this bill, as many of us have, all around the State House, and that HCI is looking at what would be a feasibility plan. And I know that there's going to be conversation, if there hasn't already, with the different House committees. I do want to encourage you to please not do another work group or task force. We've studied that and gone down that road twice in 5 years, and it's not really resulted in anything. A feasibility plan, I haven't seen the language, but I would just ask that if we're going to go down that road, because again, I do worry about kicking the can, we just have real clear goals for that process that are identified by the committees that have been taking this bill up, not just another conversation. It's not helpful for your time. It's not helpful for the people that are involved, and really putting it squarely on AHS with the legislature identifying action steps. Just quickly, I do agree with the Defender General and with some of the questions that Representative Rachelson were hinting at around more frequent reviews. Victims want closure. Victims want accountability. And certainly those who are accused are entitled to that, but also victims are as well. Joanne Corton-Dick, who's been in this committee before, in previous years, her sister was murdered in Burlington, and the person was found incompetent. For 9 years, they got no information, knew nothing, never had a day in court. And then finally, they found out a couple months afterwards that the person had actually died. So having more frequent reviews is something that the center would absolutely support because it really reflects the needs and desires of victims to not just languish in a black hole. As far as the victims' provisions, just want to reiterate, as I've testified, that these are really not controversial. That 27 work group had no concern about giving victims basic rights to notice and to be heard. You heard from Susan Aronoff just a couple of weeks ago that victims should have rights. Matt Valerio spoke to, victims getting notice and misdemeanors. Vermont Care Partners just testified in House Human Services 2 days ago that any system that is built needs to also reflect the interests and needs of victims and survivors. So those are not controversial pieces. As far as the reasonable efforts, language that was added, I think that's completely appropriate. It is all over Title 13 and Title 28. It's well defined in statute what reasonable efforts are that a victim advocate would be making. That's last known address, last known phone number, and it was just amended last year to last known email. So that putting that language in is absolutely consistent with how we ask our advocates to carry out their responsibilities. As far as the misdemeanor piece, I really appreciate the Defender General's acknowledgement that absolutely victims should get notice of what's happening with their cases. I've had victims call me because they never found out that their case was discharged or dismissed. And I'm happy that he was in support of that. I understand his concern was about do we have a hearing in every single case? And it's too late in the session, perhaps, to consider how we might thread that needle. But this committee has done that before. There are several listed crimes that are misdemeanors that are very serious. That might be a way to think about narrowing that hearing piece if there's interest in, again, trying to thread that needle. Stalking, domestic assault, violation of abuse prevention order are some of the listed crimes that are misdemeanors. We also went through, as you may recall, last year with Act 60, the ceiling list of crimes that would be qualifying and not qualifying. And we added many other crimes that would not be qualifying because some crimes of child sexual exploitation are include voyeurism. Those are not listed crimes, but they're misdemeanors that are significant enough. So if the committee has time, which I'm sure that you don't, but Act 60, we went through this last year, and it's a really comprehensive list of cases that if you don't want to have a hearing, as Defender General Valerio said, for every unlawful mischief, but you do want to think about some of those more serious crimes where, yes, somebody who was a victim in a case where there was a violation of abuse prevention order or stalking case, should they know? Yes. Should they have a chance to weigh in? Yes. So that's something I just bring to the committee for consideration in terms of how, again, you might consider threading that needle. As to the continuance language.
Before you go on,
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Angela has a question.
You were just going where I was going. Go ahead.
All right, go ahead.
The continuous.
So I'm not sure if I'll be real popular with this one, but I hope you'll understand. I agree with the testimony offered by Deputy State's Attorney Bianchi, and that this should not be a shall, it should be a may. The reason I offer that is because having worked on this issue for 5 years, I'm very sensitive and I've learned a lot about Olmstead. And that is that individuals are entitled to the least restrictive placement. That's the Supreme Court decision. And that placing it as a shall, I really worry that we will jeopardize that right that a victim would have. And to be quite honest, the may is way better than what we have in basically every other part of Title 13. Because in Title 13, in many places, we give victims the right to be heard, right to notice, but in the exact same provision, we say, but if the victim doesn't get notice, they don't have a right to a continuance. That shall not be considered. They don't have a right to have it voided. They don't have a right to a delay. So when I saw the original language, I think it was in the last iteration, I've lost track. The may, I thought, well, that's great. It gives the court discretion. You know, again, it's a question for Attorney Fitzpatrick, whether there's a significant rub up against Olmsted, but I think that the shall, by taking the discretion away from the court and potentially resulting in the holding of somebody who clinicians have said should be stepped down. I think that's something that, again, I don't want to see us put in place something for victims and survivors that's going to get challenged. I want to make sure that we are mindful of what we're putting in place. And so for that reason, I know it probably sounds odd on its face, but I want what is passed to survive scrutiny. And I think the May is a significant step up. And if anybody wants to join me during the off session and talking about all the other provisions of 13 that we should maybe look at, I'm happy to have that conversation. But for right now, this would be a significant step forward for victims and survivors. And because this population is subject to the Olmsted decision, it's an additional layer that these individuals of protection that these individuals are entitled to that doesn't come into play with those who've been charged and are not found incompetent or not guilty by reason of insanity. So again, I'm posing it as a question to perhaps, you know, for Eric, but for right now, I feel that it's safer if we want to keep this right intact to agree with what was proposed by Deputy State's Attorney Bianchi.
Go ahead.
Okay. Then, I mean, as to what's left in the bill, I had already testified as to the provision on page 9, which section 2, E2B, which lays out that process that's already in 5321 to kind of direct the court. This is going to be a new something new if it passes for judges in these cases. And I think utilizing the procedure that's already in place for, I guess, a normal criminal process makes sense in terms of having it be a helpful guide for the courts and clarifying expectations for all the parties that are involved. And I testified on that before. And then as far as the rules, I guess we don't really know what that's going to look like, but again, already testified on that and appreciate the specificity. And that's pretty much all I have. I want to thank this committee for every time this issue comes up, which it comes up every year. You always take such a thoughtful approach, and this committee really thinks about victim impact and victim inclusion. And I'm just very grateful for the work.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony as well, Jen. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Hey, Jen.
Hello.
Great event the other day for starters.
Well, no, you were a superstar. Did you win anything?
Everybody at my table won something.
Oh, but you didn't?
What's that?
But you did not?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Prizes.
Yeah. It was prizes. No, but it was a great event, and people deserve the recognition that they got. So anyway, with this bill, my biggest concern, and because it's geared around, you know, some really serious crimes, obviously, and I have a concern taking it out of the Commissioner of Corrections and giving it to the Secretary of Human Services. And my concern is safety and to make sure that these people are going to be in a situation that's going to be the ultimate safety for the public. And I believe that by having it in corrections, and I know there was talk about Springfield and having it in the prison down there, I feel that public safety would have been at a premium in that situation. So by going in this direction, putting it under the Secretary of Human Services, do you have any concerns that the facilities may not be as safe for the public? I know that we've heard a lot of concern about in what the facility looks like on the inside and that type of thing, which I personally really don't have an issue with whatever the facility looks like on the inside, as long as it's again, as long as it's safe for the public. And really secondary for me is the treatment these people are getting. But yeah, I just want to, I guess I want to hear your view as far as public safety goes once these people are in a are in confinement, I guess.
Well, I think, I will say, and I was asked this when I testified last time, that the recommendation of the Act 27, the majority recommendation of the Act 27 Working Committee was that there would be a forensic facility. There was not a conversation about DOC. DOC was not at the table. The conversation, again, was mostly focused on utilizing models in other states where it was a locked, secure forensic facility, not staff secure, it was locked. For this very small population. And I understand that there's concerns about the investment. I understand that there's concerns about, will it really be therapeutic? But I just, I do feel that we have to make the investment at some level, because what we're doing is putting staff at risk when we're putting, it reminds me of the conversation we had about DCF workers supervising young people who had been identified as causing very serious harm, and we were putting them in hotel rooms because we had no place for them to go. And then those staff were being assaulted, sexually assaulted. And so I'm just mindful of the stories that I heard shared during that conversation about the risk that we're putting staff in. So I think from the many, many conversations I've followed in all the different committees is that with AHS coming up with a feasibility plan, it wouldn't foreclose the involvement of any of their agencies. So it would include conversations with DOC and DMH and obviously Attorney Barber's here, but Dale, and also considering the substance misuse issues. So I didn't understand it to be foreclosing that at all. But I think, again, that's why I feel like if we're going to do this feasibility plan, whatever that means, it's time. These are hard decisions, and I don't sit in your seat. But it's time to craft a plan to make one. I've been doing this for 5 years. I know that other people have been doing it for 10, 15. So we need to set ourselves up as a state to actually develop action steps to figure out what this is going to look like. Because whether we like it or not, I have not heard anything about this small population that leads me to believe that if we don't change the way that we're doing things, we are not putting, we're not putting Vermonters at risk and putting staff at risk. So it's above my pay grade to decide if that's best with DOC, but that's what I trust that this feasibility plan can figure out.
Right. Yeah, and I have no problem at all with DOC being head of the security end of it. I really think they need to be, because that's what they do, and again, for public safety and mainly public safety around the victims, so victims can sleep at night. Is a big thing, and I think it should be a shared thing where human services should definitely be at the forefront as far as the treatment goes. So
No, it should be a continuum. It shouldn't be warehousing people at all. They deserve due process. Victims and survivors deserve better, but I would never understand how I could continue to function, to be quite honest, if I was Emily's mom, Kelly, and I saw a Facebook video of my daughter's killer just a few weeks before he did that, and he's laughing at our state. And so I think those are things that they do weigh on me. So I'm just hoping that whatever is decided, I don't expect there'll be a decision this year. But I really hope that the feasibility plan is a roadmap and not just another conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just as far as where I'm hoping to get this done is that we get our sections 1 through 3, the process is right, and then also importantly, section 4 that has a list of what, and this came from health and welfare downstairs, has a list of what we expect a forensic facility, to be, and making sure, and we even today with Dr. Evan suggested perhaps an additional point on that list. So really, this is what we expect this forensic facility to be, and then the final question is still the where and what's the oversight, and that's where perhaps the feasibility study comes in. That kind of layout may be what's necessary to get this, through to the end. And I think that would be pretty significant if we have the process and what we're expecting for a forensic facility. Then it's not, we're just studying this. It's just the next step is, all right, really implementation. So at least that's where I'm hoping this goes. And I think that's a feasible landing spot that we can have with this bill and have advanced the ball pretty significantly.
Well, certainly not for want of this committee trying. Again, I'm very sincere about that. And, again, I do completely agree with some of the sentiments that we need to improve what the community options are as well. Because if the goal is not to warehouse unnecessarily, then we need to have more adequate step down places and placements, because we are just talking about a narrow group. So there's a whole host of people that are covered in other states that we're not talking about, and what do we have for them? So it's just part of that continuum, part of that forensic system of care. But this is a group, unfortunately, that needs another option that we don't have.
All right, thank you very much for your testimony, and
Thank you.
we'll go to Karen Barber, and after we'll take a break.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for being here.
Yes.
And we all have in front of us the document that you sent, so that you know that we do have that in front of us.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for fitting me in this morning. I appreciate it. For the record, Karen Barber, General Counsel, the Department of Mental Health. I want to go through this, but kind of based on some of the conversations I've heard, I just want to make a few general statements first, if that's okay.
Please, yeah, please do.
We agree that this will not solve the entire problem. We do not have any sort of forensic system of care in Vermont, none. Most other states do have full systems, and so competency restoration in the community is absolutely part of that. It is a continuum of care. Ideally, that is where eventually we get to. However, we have a gap now. We have a public safety issue now. We have come to the legislature in the past and suggested very broad programs, and those have been turned down by the legislature as an option. So I appreciate that there is now this idea that we could get there, and we want to continue to work to that. But I would encourage you all not to take these small steps right now based on issues we have now, because we have seen negative public safety issues with not addressing the issue. We also would encourage, and I know this isn't necessarily your committee, but we would encourage the legislature not to do a feasibility study. I think we've studied this ad nauseum. We've been here over a decade. We've done tons of studies. We have a plan that we can put into place soon. And we believe it is a good plan. Is it perfect? Is it going to solve the entire problems of the system? No, but it is absolutely a good start. And it could help address some of the most critical gaps that we are seeing, which again is we're focused right now on a very narrow population accused of committing the most serious crimes. And so I just encourage the legislature not to kind of lose the focus of what we're doing. We have heard in the past that the legislature doesn't want big plans. And so we've really come with a narrowly tailored plan. And we'd encourage you to do that plan, implement that plan, and then continue to think about what a larger system could look like. But again, there is a gap now. And doing a study and pushing things out is only going to put the public safety at risk. We have something that we need to do now. So I'd encourage you to do that. In terms of what we're asking, as I kind of mentioned yesterday, we had some concerns with the idea of trying to put people in the custody of the Secretary of Human Services. There are custodial commissioners in Vermont. DMH is one, DOC is one, Dale is one, and there are specific kind of statutory sections about what it means to be a custodial commissioner and what the requirements are, and none of that exists for AHS. And so we had concerns about just kind of putting that out there and not having any of that structure. However, we certainly hear that there's a concern about making sure that there's real clinical oversight of the forensic facility. So what we are asking is that all the sections be changed back to the Commissioner of Corrections, that someone would be actually in the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections. However, instead of having a forensic facility clinical director, we're asking that the facility's clinical, forensic, and competency restoration services be overseen by an AHS medical director. And so that is placing the clinical part of it within AHS without kind of muddying the waters in terms of custody. And so we believe that that is a solution that addresses the concerns we're hearing about the clinical aspects of it, but also understands the realities of if someone's in DOC, they really need to be under DOC custody in order for that really to work. And so I propose
Quick question, just a quick question. So the AHS medical director, is that an existing position right now?
It is currently under recruitment.
Has that been a position for a while? It just hasn't been filled lately,
No,
or that's a new position that?
It's a new position. So some departments have their own medical director. So DMH has a medical director. Right. I believe DEBA does as well. This, the idea with that, it's a medical director that can be shared between departments who don't have medical directors. So someone who would be assisting several different departments and their needs. We don't need a whole medical director just for this because, again, we're talking about such a small population, but this would allow kind of a neutral person based out of AHS to oversee these things.
Okay, on that, Angela has a question.
Yeah, specifically on that. Thank you. So can you talk a little bit, Karen, about the authority of the existing medical directors and, vis-a-vis their respective supervisors and, the secretary, or, I'm just curious if the medical director in this case would have the ability to, how much influence they would have, or could they overrule a decision made by the Commissioner of Corrections? I'm guessing no.
Yes, I think the way this is written, I don't know if you have my language, but that the facility's clinical, forensic, and competency restorations shall be overseen by the medical director. So those decisions are decisions that would be made by the medical director. Certainly safety, custodial considerations would be within DOC purview, but it's specifically carving out all of the clinical services to be under the medical director. I can't really speak to how it works in other departments. In DMH, our medical director is part of the leadership team and reports directly to the commissioner. And so this position would report to the secretary.
This position would report to the secretary, not to the Commissioner of Corrections.
Right. Yes, this is an AHS central office position.
Um, so Ian and Barbara have questions
Oh.
on this as well, but I definitely want you to go through the rest of this language, but let's go ahead with those questions first. And yeah, so go ahead, Ian, Barbara.
Yeah, just one more off of Angela's question. Would the medical director, with their authority for clinical forensic and competency restoration services, like how those are implemented, would that include like the physical space within the forensic facility? Like, is part of overseeing how those services are implemented include like what the rooms look like, how many people are in each room, that kind of thing? Or is that going to be the commissioner of corrections because that's how they're operating the locked secure facility?
So I would say neither, that it's really based on the rulemaking, right? When we're
Okay.
talking about, so we haven't designed it yet. I think the idea would be that this position, this medical director would be at the table, assuming they're hired by the time we start working on this summer, assuming this goes through, to be a part of those conversations. But really those are, the way we envision it, is that it would be kind of all of the departments coming together to talk about what makes sense and what is feasible within corrections and how we can make the facility as therapeutic as possible.
Okay.
But
Yeah, I'm
certainly
just
day to day.
yeah. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of places where there could be like friction points between two departments that both have shall language as far as what they have to do. If there's any place where there's overlap. But it sounds like maybe with the rulemaking, that'll kind of work itself out.
I think that is our plan, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Barbara.
So thank you. I'm wondering, I understand that the Secretary of Human Services can't be the person, but I'm wondering why it can't be the Commissioner of Jail or the Commissioner of the Health Department or the Commissioner of Mental Health, why it has to be correction.
So I think, again, as we've talked about, these are not individuals that fit in only one bucket. So it's not just folks that touch the mental health system. It's not just folks that touch the jail systems. It's not just folks that touch the SUD systems. And so it makes sense to have someone based out of AHS Central Office, because it takes into account all of the complexities of the individuals and can tap into all of the resources of the various commissioners. My commissioner wouldn't have the expertise to oversee someone with a developmental disability or a substance use disorder.
Wait, and you're saying the Department of Corrections Commissioner does have that?
So again, this is placing them in the custody of the commissioner, but requiring that all clinical services be overseen by an AHS medical
Sure.
director.
So again, my question is, why can't it be the director, the Commissioner of Health, Mental Health, or jail if they're going to be overseen by the medical director? They would each have at least a sliver of expertise for a portion of the population.
So it just really isn't feasible to have someone in corrections custody who's not in a correctional facility who's not under the custody of corrections. So you can't just put everyone in the custody of the Commissioner of Mental Health, because we don't have a location to put them in, and they'd have to meet that clinical criteria. The Department of Health has no custodial statutory authority, so there's no way to put someone under their authority. And Dale's is also very narrow. So there's really no way, unless you completely rewrite statute and talk about statutory authority to put individuals in the custody of commissioners, there's no way to do that right now. It does make sense from our perspective, again, for it to be the Commissioner of Corrections, because that's where they will be located. And we've tried to address concerns by assuring that clinical services are overseen by a broader medical director based out of AHS Central Office that's able to tap into the expertise, again, of all the different departments.
And I think there's, at least I'm hearing, a lot of concern, not just in our committee, of it being a correctional facility and Department of Corrections. And looking again at, I know we have a unified system, but again, these are people who have been charged but not yet found guilty. And so I'm concerned also about the constitutional issues that could come up. In addition
Many
to the
states have
philosophical.
jail-based competency restoration systems. So I think we've extensively looked at the constitutionality, and I think we are not concerned about that. Again, is this the perfect solution? No, but this is the solution that we believe is best at this time. Again, we're talking about a very narrow population. You're not talking about a lot of people here. We're not talking about any misdemeanors. We're not talking about all felonies. We're only talking about the most serious offenses where people are facing life sentences and there are real public safety concerns. And so I think it's easy to kind of think about it broader. And would this be an ideal solution for a broader population? Maybe not, but we're talking very narrow.
People being held without bail generally right now without getting services. And I think we can't forget that that's the reality of the situation. Zach.
Aaron, it's nice to see you again, and thanks for the very expeditious review and the suggestions that you're putting forth to the committee. I think, at least as far as I'm, interpreting that, they're very well taken and certainly changes that I agree with. But I think the question that you bring up and the concern that you're presenting to all of us is a very serious one, that statutorily, this really has to be within the purview of the of corrections. And so I'm wondering if you could kind of paint a picture for the committee of what could happen if we go through with the changes as they're currently drafted with the Secretary of Human Services and with AHS, and we do not make the statutory reforms necessary to actually to make that a viable option.
Sure. So I think that there are a couple things. So one, custodial commissioners have staff that oversee folks within their custody, right? It's not just like you have someone under your custody and that's what you have whole systems that oversee it. And AHS has none of that. And so right now there's really no practical way, even if the statutory authority was there, without positions and really changes and things that they could really do this work, because it's a legal responsibility, right? When someone is in your custody, you are legally responsible for them, and so there are lots of things that you have to be doing to make sure that you're maintaining that and you're meeting your requirements. And so custodial commissioners have systems in place, have staff in place to do all these things and make sure that we're overseeing it. AHS doesn't have that. I think there's also a real question about, under statute, is can you even have someone who's not in DOC custody in DOC? Like, what authorities does DOC have to put them in there? And then there's also talk about at certain places, if someone's not complying when they're on an order outside of a locked facility, like would AHS have authority to bring them back to the facility? So I think there's just a lot of real questions around what authority does AHS have to try to be placing and managing people in facilities that they don't run. Statutory authority for commissioners is very specific about what they are allowed to do when someone's in their custody, and none of that exists now. So I think it's really ripe for a lot of litigation around it, because I think we just don't know. We have no other example of someone who doesn't have clear custodial authority and statute to try to manage someone. And so we haven't, I tried to turn this around quick, so we didn't do a full legal analysis, but I think what we really highlighted is some of those were the bigger issues, is how would we even manage that? And, practically, how would AHS do that?
Yeah, I appreciate that, and thank you for outlining the concerns, because I share a lot of them. I think litigation is probably chief among them, and I also think not only, I think we forget maybe that the goal of this legislation as drafted is to hopefully restore competency. And I know that there are many people on this committee that agree with that objective, and in some cases, it has been their profession and their life's work to really pursue this and making sure that people are getting the care that they need.
while also reminding ourselves that this population, one, is extremely small, and two, is extremely dangerous. I mean, these are people that have been charged with some of the most serious crimes. And I know I sound like a broken record because I say this day in and day out whenever we're talking about the forensic facility. It is extremely small and it is extremely dangerous. The other thing that I come back to is, and it's not so much a question, but I think it is something that your testimony has got me thinking about, is what's really in the best interest of the people that have been remanded to the custody of the state. And so if you have this population and they're in the in-between of departments and agencies and commissioners, and there's no statutory recourse, and all of a sudden you create this web of confusion. And I don't even think, I mean, even an administration that works so well together and there's great collaboration between the commissioners and departments and with the governor's office, even with a team that works so well together, it is creating such rife confusion in the environment that I don't think anyone would be able to discern, really like where does the buck stop, right? And that's kind of like, God forbid something goes wrong while these people are in the custody of the state and we don't have accountability with one agency or one commissioner. I mean, I don't know if you want to speak to that, but I mean, that to me, it just seems like what maybe was a very well-intentioned change, and it felt good for some members to see it shift from corrections. It's not practical.
Yeah, I think we really agree with that. You said it much more eloquently than I could, but yeah, it would introduce such a host of confusion and blurry lines in terms of who's responsible for what. It would be really hard for us to manage. And so what we've tried to do is hear your concerns about making sure that there is some clinical oversight other than DOC, while also making it not we have to be able to operate, and DOC needs to be able to operate. AHS needs to be operate. And so by really confusing all the issues and adding all this on, it's making it kind of impossible for us to do the things that we need to do. And so we're trying to hear you and present a solution that meets your needs, but also makes it so that we can operationally function. And so we're hoping that this is a good compromise.
I think it is. I think it's very pragmatic. So thank you.
Karen.
Yes. So just because this is I feel like a controversial, tense subject, I am going to prep a little bit of where I'm coming from on this. And it is because I've been in this committee for a bit and seeing different versions of this and seeing how long this conversation has been going on. And so for me, I'm at a place where I'm like, yeah, I want something to start. And I really appreciate the work that's been happening to kind of come to some kind of compromise and starting point. And I like that this is very focused on kind of this small population, the highest needs, and I appreciate you saying that this is not ideal. This is not the perfect solution, but let's start somewhere. And so that's where I'm willing to lean in on this, of acknowledging that, let's get something going. And I have to say, I really appreciate this change of adding the AHS medical director, because I feel like it makes this clear division between medical stuff will be through the AHS medical, security is through corrections, but we work together on these pieces. So I can get behind that. That makes sense. I guess my question, and maybe this is what you're going to get into a bit, is how does this work if somebody is deemed they don't need to be in the correctional facility and are out in the community? My understanding is that this was going to be like a probation officer was supervising them. How is that going to, so correct me if I'm wrong too, but how is that going to work with, because my understanding is a probation officer doesn't necessarily work with the AHS medical director. So how is that going to be? The medical director can provide a plan of this is what this person needs to do out in the community, but I don't feel like our probation officers are prepared or necessarily ready to support that. So if you can share more about that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, and I was just trying to look through the bill, but so
I think that's on page 5 is what I was looking at.
And so I think part of the idea was that that when someone would be released under the conditions, kind of based on their risk assessment, that ultimately, right, if someone was not complying the clinical director would have the authority to kind of step in and say they need to come back to the facility. And so that we're proposing all of that language be switched to the AHS medical director. And so while you're right, it wouldn't be the AHS medical director like out there in the field, checking on these things, but you would be reporting up to that structure where if someone wasn't complying with the treatment plan that was set out and their as part of their conditions, it would be the AHS medical director reviewing that and saying, okay, this isn't working in the community. So you'd still continue to have that level of oversight. We're suggesting anywhere it said the clinical services director that it be changed to the AHS medical director.
Yes, which I get, and again, I appreciate that, but I guess I'm thinking with the facility director, how that was, it was going to be under DOC. So like it would be easy for them to communicate. They have a communication chain already set up. This seems like this would be creating something new that probation officers would somehow need to have a mechanism to, how are they going to get in touch with the medical director? And I just feel like there's going to be training and needs and like, is that on somebody's radar and how is that all going to unfold?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's really part of kind of when we're putting together the plan of how that's going to work and potentially in rulemaking, how we're going to assure that communication, whether it's an MOU, whether it's, whatever that look like. And of course, definitely training requirements. All of those things are things that are on our radar. We just haven't fleshed out because we haven't had time. But those are all excellent points and well taken and things that we are thinking about when we're trying to figure out how to actually operationalize this.
So Dr. Ravin's point of the continuity of the clinical assistance within the forensic facility in some manner following the individual when they're being supervised at a step down level. I think that that's an important part of this, and I'm certainly going to suggest that that's one of the additional factors that need to be considered for the forensic facility. In that section that lays out what we anticipate or expect the forensic facility to be. So we actually do need to take a break. So if you could maybe ask Karen offline on that question. So we're going to be back at 11 o'clock. Thank you very much, Karen.